Take a seat a little closer as we get started. But Stéphane and I worked together on this presentation. I'm a little bit of a new guy in terms of the investment and going out. My background is mostly operational, and I recently launched a private equity group that focuses in investing in the restaurant business, understanding kind of from the front and back. Stéphane has a lot more extensive experience in branching out and franchising and so on and so forth. So we're going to talk about a couple of things today. The first one is really the decision as to whether we should branch out. But before we go there, which is the next slide, but before we go there, earlier some people asked questions about returns on investments. And I think that's a very interesting question. When I built Invest Hospitality, there were two things that happened. I attended a conference where Malcolm Gladwell was speaking, and he said two very interesting things. One was he was talking about the most trusted entities, and we're talking about the U.S. specifically, but he said the two most trusted entities in the U.S. are, number one, the Army, and number two, young entrepreneurs. And then he said the least trusted entities in America are, number one, Congress, and number two, large companies, specifically large financial companies. And this is when I walked away and said, I'm going to do a investment firm that's going to be a boutique investment firm. We're not going to go large, and we're going to support young entrepreneurs. Michael Gladwell, writes for the Fortune magazine, so if he says it, it's got to be true. My business plan's going to work. But in any case, so before you even think about investment, as are you ready? Obviously, at the time when I started looking at this, I didn't really have a brand in mind. I had more of a concept of let's build a platform that brings capital and entrepreneurs together. And what's really interesting, to go back to ROI, return on investment, and I actually define it two ways. You have the return on investment of capital, and that's for the investors. But what about the entrepreneur? That's the return on their time, for the most part. And time, as you know, is probably the most valuable thing we have, because we can make it again. You can always raise more money. You can always find a new restaurant, can always find a new partner, but going back in time is impossible. So, thinking about this today, really in thinking about branching out and investing, I actually think that the relationship between return on investment for the investors, really the same logic applies. If you're an entrepreneur, before you get into a venture, you got to think, is it worth my time? So that's the internal survey is my brand ready to travel, and does my company have the bandwidth? And I don't know if you want to touch base on that a little bit too.
I've been practicing law for 25 years, over 20 in franchising and distribution. That's all I do. I basically assist foreign brands coming into North America and Canada, and I also assist North American brands going abroad. And now with our firm, we have quite extensive reach across the world, and we're able to assist clients. For all the experience that I have and all of the clients that I've given advice to, I spend a lot of the time on the front end discussing whether they're not, if they're ready to travel, and whether or not they're ready to commit to taking their brand outside of their home, their domestic market. I should also mention that success domestically doesn't necessarily mean success internationally. So there's a big introspection that they have to do internally. And I'm not talking about just the development level, the operational level. I'm talking about the management level, senior management level, right to the CEO. Because taking your brand across borders, which is not a familiar market, requires a commitment that you can always back away from, but there are tremendous consequences to back away from that commitment. There are financial, there are human resources. So there's a, you know, we're going to talk about due diligence when you're going to another market. There's a huge internal due diligence that you have to do internally before you make that decision. And for me, that's the first step before actually taking the next step, which is going abroad. So that is, for me, and the advice that I give, as I said on the front end before, to really go through that exercise very carefully. So that, and I call it alignment. And so everybody on every level has to be aligned in order to ensure, there's no guarantees in life, but ensure success as much as possible. Now, so that sort of touches on brand width. The other issue is you know, thinking about that. I mean, when you consider whether you're ready, you also have to consider, you know, whether or not you have the ability, financially, human resource-wise, and otherwise, to carry out that commitment. So that whole exercise for us thought was a good segue into the nuts and bolts of our presentation, because it's a gentle reminder of the importance of really thinking this through before buying plane tickets and going to Mumbai, for example, or going to Shanghai, or going to Dubai.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think that, again, we're going into the second one, which in most cases, if you're going into a new market, and I mentioned this yesterday at a little bit of a smallest session, is that if you're operating brands in Manhattan and you intend to go to Brooklyn, you actually have to do the same due diligence. It might not cost as much money as, you know, getting a plane ticket to Shanghai, but understanding the commitment that it takes. And actually within Manhattan, between the, you know, Upper East Side, Upper West Side, Midtown, downtown, all the way to the financial center, you know, you have, you know, different aspects as well. So, you know, it's not just, you know, I'm based in New York, and we made an investment in a company outside of San Francisco, and it was a big commitment, because by the time I go from, you know, New York to San Francisco, I waste a day going there, and I waste a day coming back. And again, you know, going back on my time and the value, you know, much more profitable. But, you know, so it goes back to partnership. The only reason we made the investment in California is because the local partner, someone I trusted, you know, we shared some of the same affinity for quality and brands, and we think we can do this together. So the value synchronicity has to be there. You have to be believing in the same thing, and then obviously the person you're partnering with is going to become an ambassador of your own brand. Their ability to reach the local environment is very important. So before making an investment, really evaluate how much that person brings to you on the ground.
So for me, this is my second warhorse. This is probably as important, or if not more important. Did you know that Domino failed and pulled out of India twice until they found the right partner, which was Foodworks, a company called, Jubilant Foodworks. And so they were unsuccessful 2 times, and then when they found the right partner, well, they now have 400 units, and they're looking to open 100 units more. In my mind, it is also as clear that the most important thing when you're leaving your home environment, and I would equate it to franchising when you're picking your franchisee. You have to pick somebody that's going to share your values, that has the know-how, perhaps the operational skills, the financial capabilities, perhaps access to real estate. But all of these elements are even more important when you're going into a country or into a jurisdiction where the language is different, the law is different, the culture is different, the religion is different, the business way of doing business is different. So, some people direct franchise in certain countries, and for some people it may work, but I think that the very successful companies have identified, and sometimes it takes a lot of time. It can take years sometimes to find the right person, and sometimes it's through trial and error. But if there's anything that is as significant as the front-end due diligence internally, is the time and investment that you have to make into finding the partner that's going to, as Alex put it, be your ambassador in that jurisdiction, because he's, your brand is the most precious thing that you have, and so you're entrusting it for a period of time to somebody else who will represent you in that market. So it is fundamental that that person will do the job that you're doing. That's the whole concept of franchising, is to replicate, to clone something. And we had a discussion this morning about how difficult for, in fine dining sometimes, it's difficult because it takes the chef, it takes, a number of elements to come together to be successful. Well, the right partner applies in that conversation and applies in this conversation today. If you agree.
And let me also talk about the partnership at a different level. On our platform, in our fund, we actually have 20% of our fund dedicated to being incubators. So we find chefs who want to, grow a restaurant group, or restaurateur who want to go restaurant group, and we provide them with a structure, HR, payroll, some advice on, not necessarily as a lawyer for legality, but negotiations, deal structure, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, also interviewing a partner, interviewing a chef who really wants to become a businessman, opens up a lot of questions. Do they just really want to cook and become the next Jean-Georges, or do they really want to be business people? And in the terms of negotiations, in this joint venture, are they going to say, I have to approve, I'm the only person that can say what the restaurant is designed, how the restaurant is designed, how the kitchen's designed, what's on the menu, and so on and so forth. Now, most chefs need a lot of editing. They can't really, they don't have the flexibility most of the time. So, in our platform, we ask them, I tell them all up front, I say, forget about control. You can control your recipes, and we won't tell you, what you need to put, in your recipes. But as far as taking the number one seller away because you're tired of cooking it, so we're not going to be on the same page here, because we're here to build a clientele, and we have a responsibility to our investors to give them a return. So if you want to play our game, we'll be great partners. If you want a one-man show, then you have to go seek money and support from someone else.
And this is where I introduce my two-bucket theory, and it applies particularly in the restaurant business. Being a chef or a restaurateur, or executing a concept, especially in the food and beverage business, is one thing. Being a businessman is another thing. Not everybody, it's sort of like being a lawyer. You can be a very good lawyer, but you could be a terrible business developer. Some people don't have it all. So there are chefs, and I think we even had a confession this morning of chefs that are not really business people, and my experience with chefs is generally they're not. But then they need a business partner to help them, and they need, when in Alex's case, when there's an investment company behind them that is responsible to their shareholders and investors, you need to tie all of that together to make sure that everybody's jobs are defined, and that the chef is, if he's not the business person, quote unquote, that he focuses on what the concept is set up to do, and the business people will French we say encadrer,
Surround.
will surround them and will make sure that we stay within the bounds of the business plan and the financial model that has been tailored for the particular concept.
Right, absolutely. So brings us to our next point in entering new markets specifically is, critical mass is really important. If you're going to enter a new market, how quickly will you generate enough revenue to have the best possible operator managing your day-to-day operations and managing your brands? So, can the market support, 3 of the same brands, for example, or are you going to have to do multi-brand in that market? So these are questions that you really have to think about. Again, to go back to our platform, when our fund actually has interest in anything from a fast casual segment all the way to Joel Robuchon. We have a burger concept, a low-end steakhouse concept. We have a high-end steakhouse concept. And our strategy is to have a director of food and beverage style person in each market that can actually manage almost like a multi-licensing agreement. So it requires a very specific person. With the casino background, I understand that because we had to manage, close to, I don't know, Tobias, 12 licensing agreements between the fine dining and Starbucks and everyone else. Right. So today, Tobias and I are working on this project in Miami where we went in, Tobias is actually consulting for Swire on the mall, and we went in with one concept, and so right away I said, how can I reach critical mass? That was my first instinct. So how can I get the steakhouse? How can we do a pub concept? Can we do a juice concept? What can we do? Because in our portfolio we have a lot of different things. And so now, we're thinking, great, now we can have a managing director on the ground. We can, build a little ecosystem that's going to be able to handle the 4 or 5 locations that we'll have in that mall. So these are the type of thought process, and the risk associated actually is less for the investor now, because we have one company that's going to develop 5 concepts, so we'll probably spend $500,000 less aggregated for the concepts overall, and we're going to have an economy of scale on the unit level that's going to be quite good for our return on investment.
And this is a good tie-in back into finding the right local partner, because ideally, like you, if you have a significant portfolio of brands and you've made the decision after careful consideration to introduce a number of those brands in a particular market, you obviously want to find, because you're not going to be investing your HR in that market, you're going to rely on that partner to support the needs of that market for the various brands. I think I would also like to sort of highlight the importance of the rollout strategy, because the rollout strategy is going to vary most likely from market to market. So, and the rollout strategy involves a number of things. It involves, the structure that you're going to use. Are you going to do a joint venture with somebody? Are you going to use a master franchisee? Are you going to use an area developer? How are you going to penetrate the market? Of course, with what, and after that decision has been made, and sometimes that decision will come after meeting with the right partner, because then that, your initial thought about entering the market in a certain way with a certain structure may change, because that particular market is different. I'll give you an example. In France, I can tell you that the partners that my clients have done business with in France, they like to be handheld. They like to feel that their North American brand is with them every step of the way initially. And initially doesn't mean the first couple of weeks for training. It means for the first couple of years. So that may change the structure in which the relationship will be set up. And so coming back to the rollout strategy, you have to, you really have to understand the market that you're going in. I mean, I think we're getting to the due diligence of the market, but that's another stage of this whole exercise in this whole process, is you have to understand how it works, and you have to make sure that it's set up in the way that it will work, because nobody wants to fail. That's the worst case scenario.
Yeah. Well, the next point is exactly that. How are you going to adjust your brand or the product? And the market research, the due diligence, understanding what works in the market, what doesn't work, where people have failed. Early on, we were speaking about a chef who went to Beijing and had to close up doors. Now, they spent a tremendous amount of time, never got paid, and it was a waste of a couple of years. So
and lots of money.
and lots of money
because
for,
the investment
for
to set it up,
everybody.
it was huge.
So everyone loses. So obviously the market research. So recently we, on our platform, we decided to partner up with a hotel group called Cachet. They're based out of Shanghai, and they asked us to come in and help them because our operational expertise is quite good. We know how to control cost, and we're pretty good at projections and really understanding what drives the financials. They have a couple of people who are very good creatively on the ground for food and beverage, but they never really had anyone to edit their work and making sure that we're not building a menu that's either too big or too out of the price range, and understanding also how to manage labor with that. So we're going into this process right now, and we're being very cautious. We're spending the least amount of money on capital possible with some very low risk brands so that we can test the market, and hopefully we'll do this for a year or two, and when we really understand the market, maybe we'll go in a significant way with bigger brands. We got a request a few days ago for L'Atelier, which we represent in the U.S., to go into Shanghai, and I'm scared to death to do this because the chances of survival are very, very, very small. So in 2 years, understanding the market a little bit better, I'll probably be a little bit more equipped and thinking it through. But the first thing in mind, we decided to position ourselves with the investors at Invest Hospitality. So the first thing I think about is, what is the return going to look like? And should I really be spending my time on something that doesn't show a lot of returns?
And on understanding the market or market research, I mean, you have to go. You have to spend some time there. You have to send your people there, not just one person, but those who will be involved in actually implementing the strategy have to go so they can get their head around the challenges that will arise. And so that's one element. You have to understand also, and those people can help you on your team, understand, you just touched on this, the competitive environment, to see whether or not, or whether the challenge is there. Where are you going to go? What type of locations are you going to want? What are your competitors doing? And you really have to take the time, and this doesn't happen in a couple of months. It takes a couple of years, because there are people behind that have put serious money on the table, relying on you to have done your homework on the front end. So now we've done a number of things. We've done our own internal assessment. We've selected the right partner, or parallel, we're entering the market, but we have to understand that market. We're going to have to do a financial model. We're going to have to sort of get our head around what it's going to cost, get a sense of how much real estate costs, how much, we're going to talk about sourcing a little bit later on, but all of those issues have to be looked at carefully to understand what we are getting ourselves into. And once we're satisfied, and in 2 years or less, hopefully, you'll be satisfied that you will have done that homework, and I'm sure that then you will be much more comfortable going into a market like China, and in particular like Shanghai.
Yeah. Well, in this particular case, we're fortunate because we have people who have lived in Shanghai for 12 years. The CFO is very helpful in helping us putting the pro formas together, so we understand every single cost item. I mean, you know, the difference between what you're paying in the U.S. and what you're paying in China in terms of taxes and is you know, night and day. So you really truly have to understand every line on that P&L. The brand adjustment, I mean, again, the flexibility, you're talking about who, you know, sending your people there. You want to send your most flexible people there. People who've traveled a lot and, you know, don't necessarily have too big of an ego, because, you know, you have to go in and you really have to learn. You know, in China, again, you know, to take that one example, people eat Chinese food for the most part. You know, I mean, the locals are eating Chinese food a lot. So if you're going to do a concept, you know, how friendly are you going to be to that clientele, or are you going to alienate them, or, you know, limit their visit? You know, someone mentioned earlier on the design that it's all about volume. Our business is all about volume, and then it's figuring out, you know, how much you know, people have to spend for you to make sense of the financial model. But without volume, you need a lot of traffic. So your brands have to appeal to a lot, and you have to think about all the distribution channels. You know, concierge from outside local businesses. Are you going to do deliveries? Are you going to work on a special events? You know, doing banqueting and weddings and you know, anything that really you can grasp, because, you know, any revenue is good revenue at this point when you're going out. So.
And there, I don't think we'll disagree, but I would put a big however, and this comes back to the internal assessment. As much as we have to be flexible, and as much as we have to adapt, I believe there are certain core products that are directly, intimately tied to the brand that may pose some problems. And so coming back to that, in the analysis of how far you're going to go in adapting your concept in the market you're going to, you know, you don't want to lose what made you famous and successful. It sounds obvious, but you know what? Sometimes clients lose sight of that. I have one example. I have a client who has a coffee concept in Canada and who's exported it in Australia and North Africa, and now he's in Cyprus. And one thing that he will not compromise on is the coffee, which is brewed with a special mix in, not brewed, but it's, I don't know what the expression is. It's roasted in Canada, and then it's shipped not only to Cyprus, it's shipped to Australia, it's shipped by container. So you can imagine the cost of that. So right now, there's actually a bit of we're not in litigation, but there's a bit of a difference of opinion, shall I say, about how much more this is affecting the master and his franchisee's bottom line, because then he's saying, you know what? Give me your recipe. I'll source the product out of the region, and it'll cost less, and I'm going to make more money. But now you're taking away a few points on my return, and it's an issue. And so you have to sort of think about what products you are not willing to compromise on, and what other products you are willing to compromise. And so that's recipes. That's a whole. When you look at the concept as a whole, I mean, there may be some elements of the concept that may not be negotiable, and that's part of the analysis that you have to do also on the front end, but also that you may have to sort of rethink when you're actually speaking to somebody on the other side of the table who's saying, well, no, well, in Morocco, this is not, you can't do this. Or in Muslim countries, you can't do this. And, you know, but you have to, I think the bottom line is you have to be open, but you also have to be clear on what you're prepared to do and what you're not prepared to do. Because if you're not prepared to do something, well, you shouldn't be wasting your time. And that's part of just looking into and understanding the market in which you are going.
Yeah, how much are you ready to give up?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, so the last part is really execution. You know, we've talked about all the due diligence in the world and everything there is to do, but you know, obviously it becomes a people business. Human capital is probably the most important asset. And you know, there was someone talked about cheap labor, and I mentioned yesterday that I don't believe there is such thing as cheap labor, because you know, labor that's not well trained is actually very expensive labor, because they turn away your customers. So you know, it doesn't matter how cheap the labor is, you really have to spend a lot of time, energy, and money in making sure that every step of the brand is extended through. So the human capital element is very important, treating people with respect in the different markets they're in. And make sure that, you know, it's really about engagement at the end of the day. But 90% comes from training.
Yeah, and you know, with respect to cheap labor, I would maybe phrase it in another way, in a different way. In certain countries, there is cheap labor in the sense that labor is not expensive, but on the other hand, there is also very qualified expert labor, especially in the food industry. If you go into certain countries where there's a history of gastronomy and food, just mention Morocco again, just because I've worked there the last couple of years quite a bit with 2 clients. But there's really, in terms of pastries and food preparation, there's an expertise in that country that is not expensive. So I would perhaps put it like that. And you have to take advantage of that. And I would probably say that in Asia, you would also find that kind of inexpensive expertise, which you can leverage in terms of building you know, a team that will support your operations. Now, I was speaking to Irzio of Gaston Arcurio's companies, and talking about the challenges of exporting his Peruvian brand outside of Peru and Latin America. And having been there a number of times and having been to his restaurants, I appreciate the quality of the product that his product offering. But there are challenges to that, because contrary to perhaps Chinese or Japanese or Italian, the skilled labor to prepare in the way that he does Peruvian food is actually quite rare. And he was sharing that's one of the challenges. And that's a challenge that's shared also in other types of cuisines that may not be so you have to understand that as well. So that's going to add another incremental cost to going into a market or another, because it's going to force you to manage human resources in a way that you may not have to manage as much in another market.
Yeah. Obviously, the second point is the sourcing of commodities. So how you're going to source the product that you need. And that's a big concern. I mean, especially if you to go back to Asia, you have literally 1 billion people have been eating rice for years, and now protein is become much more of a diet. Where is it coming from? Who's producing it? I mean, you have this massive development, and people changing their habits. They're not changing their habit in 1 day or 2 days, but there's going to be a need, a huge need. One of the fastest growing brand of the last 5 years, Chipotle, is approaching this. I mean, they're coming into Europe. They're having huge issues sourcing, what they need in order to grow. It's fairly easy in the U.S., but again, because it's about their brand integrity, is Actually, it's called Food with Integrity as their tagline. And they're having a big issue. So anyone going into those new markets is going to have a real hard time. And there's only so much the market can bear. In the U.S., for those who are in the U.S., when the cost of beef is outrageous, it's very difficult. You know, you're buying a steak in New York City at $55, and you're thinking, you know, the restaurant's making so much money, but they're running 55% food costs on that particular steak. So the cost of commodity is going to be a big issue.
Yeah, particularly because you have to be sensitive to the person that's going to be executing your concept in that market. And of course, you're only going to make money if he makes money. So, you know, when you think about the different elements of the costing elements, you know, in another program they talked about, you know, fixed costs and labor costs, and food costs is a really big line item on that P&L. And so you have to be sensitive in those markets. Now, depending on the concept, it will not always be possible to source part of the product locally, which means, coming back to the coffee concept is an interesting example just because the operator there is convinced, because that particular supplier already brews coffee, roasts coffee for other competitors. So if he can do it for others, why couldn't he do it for them? So then the argument that was presented by the franchisor was, yeah, but he's going to steal my formula. So the answer was, well, he can just go and buy your coffee and have it analyzed, and he'll figure it out. I mean, it's not really that much of a secret, you know. It's not how to put the caramel into the Caramilk or the Coke formula, which apparently is stored somewhere in a vault somewhere when nobody's figured it out yet. But all that to say is being sensitive to the cost component is going to enable you to determine how you're going to source product. And in a lot of cases, a lot of product can be sourced locally or in proximate regions, but others may pose more of a challenge. But that's certainly something that is going to be required to look at very carefully.
Yeah. And then the last part, when you're thinking about investment, is how you're going to market your brand. I think the best news today is that with social media, it's actually a lot more accessible than it ever was. You know, your ability to tap into the local environment and getting this word of mouth that's really amplified. You know, a lot of the philosophies are different, but I worked with a very good restaurateur in New York when I was a CEO of Be Our Guest. Steve Henson was one of my mentors, you know, for 3 years, and his philosophy was one guest at a time, and really truly delivering on that experience every single time, and you know.
So it's word of mouth.
Word of mouth, exactly. But the good news is now you can amplify it.
Well, now word of mouth is now,
yeah.
You know, Facebook is noticed to the world, right?
to the good and to the bad. I mean, you know, you open to a disastrous opening, and you know, people are all over you on Yelp, and you know, for the most part, you deserved it, and you have to live with it. You know, restaurateurs that tell me that, you know, Yelp is horrible. I said, well, just do a better job. You know, so of course you have, you know, out of 10 people, you take 20%, you throw it away because it's not necessarily. But for the most part, even the comments from people are harsh. If you listen to Yelp, you put a filter and you get out the substance. A lot of what the customers are saying is true. So you have to listen. So again, it's you know, the marketing and the feedback, and then you go back to your drawing board about adjusting your brand based on the feedback that you're getting, because that's also very important. And you know, we invested in a concept recently in part of Texas, and while the product is impeccable, the locals are telling everyone it's too expensive. You know, and it took a while for the entrepreneur to hear me, and you know, I'd call him and say, "Don't you think you're a little expensive?" And you know, he's giving me all the reasons why, because he's using the best mozzarella out there, and he's using this, he's using that. And I said, great, but every other review on Yelp is telling you that you're expensive. So, you know, you can continue, you can go out of business if you want, but I'd love to get my money back. So, you know, so you really, again, and that's why the due diligence, again, we go back to the due diligence, but how you're going to market and what's going to be your image in the market right when you open the door. It's so important today.
And there's also traditional marketing, and I'd be curious, this is my first time in Dubai, and many of you live here, but when brands are introduced here, what kind of marketing, more traditional marketing initiatives have you seen? Do you have billboards? Do you have television? Do you have radio? Do you have magazine ads, newspapers? I'm assuming there's probably a mix of all of that. And would you say that in the restaurant, either it's QSR or, you know, casual or fine, most of them do make use of that or not? The big boys do. Okay. And
it's expensive to reach to Sorry.
Can you speak up a little bit, Thomas?
We'll get you a microphone. Just in case someone else would like to.
I think yes. The media is very expensive. Really? And what is the impact of that, you think? Yeah. And expensive.
It is only because it's expensive.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, I would love to, let's say, use about 20 half pages every year if I could afford it.
But okay, so if you did, do you think that would have a significant impact on new business?
Obviously, you're reaching out to more people every day. We have to remember that Dubai has a very huge transit population. There's about 1 million tourists here every day,
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to read the newspaper in their hotel room, and that might also guide them as to where they would want to eat.
Or ask the concierge. Yeah.
We'll tell you to send you to their own restaurants.
Yeah. Well, there's one thing that's very clear, is that there's no one formula fits all. It depends on many things. I could just give you an example, which has nothing to do with the restaurant industry, and Babette is here. When Dentons was created a year ago, this international law firm, which is a result of 3 international law firms, we did only electronic media. And I could tell you that it took a bit of time for some people to find out about it, just because there's a lot of people that are still used to traditional media. They're still used to opening the newspaper in their hotel room or in their office every morning or at home. They're still used to watching television and hearing it on the radio. Obviously, maybe a law firm wouldn't do that. But the paper media is still valued. And so, I mean, I have a lot of people that I know that really said, oh, you did this, wonderful, we didn't see it. Well, no, you have to be plugged into the electronic media to find out about it. You may want to take that.
And there was a lot of interest, and they had spent a lot of money within Dubai Mall, to promote their brand. But what I'm trying to reinforce is that the cost of the print media here is pretty high compared to the readership, The reach is hardly anything. It's talking about a print run of about 80,000 a day, which is nothing.
Right.
Sorry. The difference here is radio. Radio is a massive medium in Dubai. If you look at the numbers, just driving numbers, we don't really have a public transport to speak of. The amount of people that listen just daily to radio. So radio has been a big impact for. So with Cheesecake Factory, the actual, sorry, I'm no good at names, but the actual CEO came to Dubai and promoted his brand about 6 months beforehand and said, I'm going to be massive. Got in the partnership with the local shopping operator here, and that's it, boom, they're off. And that makes a big difference for here. So we have word of mouth. Social media is getting big, particularly with the young. Emiratis love it, get to text all the time. It's quite a closed society, so it's a way for them being able to open up. Doesn't have the controls from their parents. So, sorry, that was really just my point.
Yeah. Well, speaking about the CEO who goes on, for site openings, I mean, Howard Schultz of Starbucks does that all the time. I mean, we had a restaurant open in Montreal 2 months ago, and he was there. It was a sort of a showcase store, and he wanted to make a big splash, and he showed up. He was there for a day, and then he toured a few other shops, and then he was off to another store opening somewhere else in the world. And that, I can tell you, made a huge, I agree with you, it made a huge impact, because then it was a bit in the paper, but the impact in the social media was a much bigger return on investment of his time and for the benefit of his store that was there, because there were lineups from the day that he arrived. And I could drive by there every day, and there are lineups there every day. Now, of course, Starbucks is a hugely successful concept by any, and so we are pretty much at the end of our presentation,
Yeah,
but we still have about a little bit less than 10 minutes. If you have questions or if you want to share anything, I would invite you to speak up.
Basically, for growing markets, growing brands on a big scale, the US is a phenomenal example of how brands can be relatively small and then become huge. From a legal perspective, have you looked at best practice in terms of business models that have worked more than others in terms of the casual and the fast casual segments of the industry, where you've looked at in retrospect, so you connected the dots after looking at brands like who grew from 35 units to 200 units in very limited time. Have you, from a legal perspective, have you seen different models that worked better than others?
Well, yes, I have. I could tell you that different clients have different business models, and they grow in different ways. I'll give you two examples. Dunkin' Donuts, who I've worked with for 15 years, internationally, they work through the master franchise model. They just signed a deal a year and a half ago with India, 500 units with a huge company. and they're going to build over 10 years, 500 stores or more. I didn't see the agreement, but that's what I was told. Subway doesn't use the master franchise model. They use an area development model, which is a bit different legally, because the relationship between the unit franchisee is not with the area developer. It's with Doctors and Associates, who's a franchisor of Subway. And so there's a sort of a trilateral. So the area developer is the one who, he can own units, of course, but he's the one that grows the market and then is responsible for training, is responsible for operations and all of that. But the legal relationship is directly, in many instances, I haven't seen all over the world, but generally what I've seen is that's the relationship. And that's worked phenomenally well. As you all know, Subway has, I think, over 16,000 units all over the world. Dunkin' Donuts has over 13,000 units all over the world, and they're hugely successful. So is there one that's more successful than the other? Well, I just gave you two examples of those that are, you know, relatively similar.
And these are franchises.
And these are franchises.
If you go back to Cheesecake Factory,
right.
I mean, you know, they had this growth. It happened over a 10-year period. They went from one store to 160, I think, in like, you know, 12 years. And it wasn't easy. I mean, I had breakfast with the former president of Cheesecake Factory. He's a good friend of mine. And for 2 hours, he's now a good friend of mine, but he explained some of the things that they did was breakthrough. I mean, they came up with the BMW concept, where every general manager, everyone knew in the industry that general manager of Cheesecake Factory was making $100,000 a year. Now, this is 15 years ago. $100,000 a year, you get a company BMW and stock options. So what happened is, when they were struggling to hire people, when they did that, and you think about it, I mean, for a $10 million revenue average restaurant, a $350 lease a month for a BMW is nothing, but it changed their company because everybody wanted to work for them, and everybody in the company wanted to be the general manager. This simple. And they drove growth like crazy. The last year of growth, they opened 26 stores in 1 year.
It's franchise or company owned?
No, it's all company owned.
It's all owned.
And at this point, so what happened too is that they changed the landscape of the mall business. Them and P.F. Chang ended up becoming the anchors, and they followed the commercial development throughout the U.S., and quite successfully. I mean, at the beginning, they were giving those huge TI because Cheesecake Factory, you know, serving maybe 3,000 meals a day was a huge draw for that. And what ends up happening is they figured out that, no, you know what, stop giving us TI. We'll pay you the minimum rent possible because we're making so much money that we don't need your money. We just want to pay the minimal rent. Even 4% rent was like expensive back then for them. This is a brand that was spending $1 million in pre-opening expenses, and Wall Street was like screaming at them and so on and so forth. But you know, they kept on driving the stock up, and it's a huge story, and quite incredible to see how they're growing outside of. They just signed a deal to do China. They did a licensing agreement a few days ago, and it's quite unbelievable. They broke all the rules. 220 dishes on the menu. But it was so painful. I mean, he was explaining to me how painful it was for them to figure these things out. But the entrepreneur was the reason that they got there, because he was just relentless about making it work.
If you don't mind, I have another question for
sure,
you
yeah.
on the private equity part. The more we talk about it, the more we realize it's a people's business. And the higher you go in the levels of dining, the more the human element is important and the less the process becomes relevant because it's art, more artistic. Like. So when you look at companies that have tried to move from a single chef to an institution, I'm talking about more upscale formats. And all of a sudden there is a need for cash, for structure, for growth. So private equity, investment bankers start getting involved. How do you feel the interests are aligned in the sense whereby the investor wants growth.
Yeah.
So we're investors, so we want growth.
Private equity should not get involved with high-end concepts. It's simple.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, we can afford to do it because, you know, I have an operational background, and we don't promise the type of returns that the private equity are promising. So just, you know, full disclosure, the company I worked with in New York was owned by Starwood Capital Group. And, you know,
You mentioned Be Our Guest, so.
Yeah, so, you know, I worked for 3 years with Steve Henson, who was the entrepreneur who built the business for 26 years, and Starwood Capital, who bought 50% of the company in 2007. Timing is everything. So, you know, when Starwood Capital is sitting with an investment fund that has promise of 12% compound returns, and you buy a company at the eve of 2008, you can only imagine what happens. So, you know, unfortunately, Steve Henson is no longer with the company after building the company for 26 years. And we went through a sale process at Be Our Guest, and the company never sold. So, you know, and so that's also both sides. I mean, if you have a brand today, when you bring a private equity in, and who that is so important, because, you know, they're charming guys when they need a deal. They're going to be the nicest people in the world, and they'll give you projections that, you know, you're already spending money based on looking at their chart. You know, you feel wealthy already just thinking of it. And, you know, but then when the reality comes in, and they spend half of their time questioning you about numbers and rewriting the budget and redoing this and redoing that, and now you're spending more time financial engineering than actually running your business, then you have a problem. So, you know, some private equity groups are very good. A very good one is Catterton. They've done a terrific job in many cases. They did a strategic investment in blooming brands, Outback, and since they've been involved, the company has been thriving. They're doing really well because, again, they know exactly what they're doing. But if you look at private equity groups that are invested in higher end brands, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. I mean, you couldn't do this with Joël Robuchon. A typical private equity group could never work with a Joël Robuchon type.
And so for the middle and the low, I mean, the fast casual, the casual, you feel is
fast
more?
Casual is incredible today. That's every private equity group wants to get in because Chipotle trades at 50 times earnings. I mean, you know, why wouldn't you want to get in? So what's interesting is, so if you're an operator today and you have 5 units of fast casual, and let's say those 5 units bring you $1 million EBITDA, you can sell your company for $20 million bucks. You know, that's more than what you do in revenue. Okay, it's like 4 or 5 times what you do in revenue. And the reason they're doing this is because they just base their, you know, it's all based on growth. And what happens when it doesn't grow? Or it doesn't go correctly, or we go back to what we've gone through, and, you know, you start growing in the wrong market, and, you know, because a couple of bad locations, and that private equity group is gone. They're paying attention to someone else. So, you know, I read something, you know, that's so true. Is like, you know, the cheapest capital is the one you can generate yourself. So before you partner up with a private equity group and you think that you need $10 or $15 million in capital to grow more, you know, think again. Do you really need that? And often, I was actually speaking with a gentleman who has a juice business, vegan juice business that's also grab and go, similar to Pret-a-Manger, but it's all vegan. And he was telling me how he was signing a deal with a private equity. He has 4 units. And I walked the store with him, and I could tell that, you know, just in 10 minutes, you know, we could have found 15 different points where he could improve his profit margin today. I said, spend your time doing that. You know, get your unit economics to be the best they can be, because that's the cheapest capital you ever get. So, you know, that question, you know, happens all the time. But then you have, you know, really good private equity groups. There's a very successful deal that happened back in the US again with a company called Yard House. I don't know if you know, it's like a sports bar. Now they drove the multiple. They sold at 13 times the following year's projections. So in 2012, they sold 13 times their 2013 projections. And they had a combination that was very good. They had more than 50% cash on cash return. Their AUV, average unit volume, was more than $10 million, with their 10 newer stores being more around 11 million. And Darden, who ended up being the buyer, really needed a big box brand that could compete with cheesecake. So it drove the multiple, and the private equity group did really well. The guys who founded the original business did really well. I mean, the company sold for $555 million.
You may be familiar with Smashburger. That's another example. A gentleman I met in Denver. He's also from a private equity background. They grew this burger, like Better Burger business from so he's a private equity guy, but I think they teamed up with the right operating, and that's been a success from 35 units to 200 units in less than 2 years. So sometimes it works. This is what I'm saying.
But you have to choose your right equity partner, because the problem is I had a client who actually nixed a deal because he was talking to KKR, and KKR is known to be quite tough. And clearly, because I had two comments to add to Alex's comments, is one, the arrival of a private equity group in a franchise business, for example, I could tell you, can create tremendous insecurity with franchisees. The unit franchisees in particular. Perhaps not the masters, but even the masters. So you sort of have to be mindful of that, and there's a bit of a learning curve there. But the group, it's sort of like finding your right partner. It's always the same discussion. I mean, if you're going to partner with a private equity group to get more capital, you better be sure that those people are not going to start telling you too much what to do, because if they're interested in you, that's because you've done something right. And they're basically acting as a bank. And so, my banker doesn't tell me, unless I use my line of credit too much, he doesn't call me. So you have to select your right partner for that aspect of your business, because then it can become very messy. Because as Alex just pointed out, you're spending, all of a sudden you're spending more time, talking to your shareholder or to your partner to justify everything that you're doing, instead of concentrating on what we do best, which is running your business.
No, it's serious, because that's their business is about valuation. So, it doesn't matter if you were worth $10 yesterday, if you're worth $9 today. Like, what happened? What did you do? What did you do differently? We'll change it now. Like, let's go. But again, a lot of very good private equity groups out there. If they're buying the right things and they're growing the right way, then it's great. But be very careful about partnering with private equity group that's never been in the restaurant business. I mean, just like stay away from them completely. That's my advice. But yes.
Let's say somebody wants to start a franchising model now for casual dining concept. How important to this business strategy is secret recipes or master sauces, those kind of things? Because we've heard a lot of people who've gone out, like with a new brand, made it very successful, and then they started franchising it. And sooner or later, after about 2 or 3 years, they found that the franchise partner would either not pay the royalties under some guise or the other, that kind of a thing. So they ended up having problems. I myself started for my company many years ago, Gaylord restaurants all over the world, Indian restaurants. This was in 1982. In a span of about 3 years, we opened about 29 restaurants in Europe, in America, in Southeast Asia, everywhere. And everything was going very well for first couple of years. And then somebody down the line, we used to have kind of once in a year or once in 2 years to get all these people together, you know, for a small seminar, or it's like a picnic basically. And somebody started stirring up a story that, what are these guys giving us? You know, we pay the chefs, we pay the managers, we take care of all the expenses, we take care of all the overheads. So it became a very difficult question to answer at that point of time, but it stirred a controversy which actually ended up within 5 years, the whole company just had to wind up. Because we were having problems with the Reserve Bank of India. You know, we have this statutory requirement where you have to register all franchise agreements with the Reserve Bank. They know how many dollars are supposed to come in every year. If you don't bring in that many dollars, they get after your back. What's happening? Are you taking the money outside? You know?
Well, I mean, the franchise relationship is one where very often, after a little while, once the franchisee has absorbed and understood the secrets of the concept, says, you know what, I could do this myself. I don't need him. I don't need to pay for the brand. That happens all the time. It happens even more in certain countries where, you know, the distance also creates issues because, you know, exercising control in a country in Latin America or Africa and where the rule of law sometimes is not the same as the rule of law in other countries, that poses problems. So, I mean, the idea, and it always comes back to choosing the right partner, and sometimes the right partner is one who has experience, who's one who operates other brands, perhaps not competing brands, but other brands, who is sophisticated enough that you know, and you do due diligence on that person or that company as well, that hopefully will not happen and will likely not happen just because you've done the work on the front end. But I can't tell you that there's a recipe to prevent that because it happens all the time. It happens domestically, but it happens also very much internationally. So as a lawyer, all I can tell you is everything that I've told you so far, plus, you know, get your legal paperwork in order so that when and if you run into that problem and you discover that, you know, typically what happens is your master franchisee or your franchisee is going to run a competing brand under, you know, and he's going to start letting your brand go and he's going to focus on his own brand. And that's what happens very, very often. But
It's the same thing in the hotel business.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, owners want to deflag a hotel because they think they have the crown jewel.
Right. So there's no you know, magic solution to that. I think, again, due diligence, right partner.
There's very little technology in food. It's all value addition. If companies were to really, let's say, they had some 5 or 6 top-selling dishes and there was a special sauce that they had created, all those particular things, and they were, let's say, the icons of the menu. And if you had that kind of control that you were the one who supplied them with products, they would like to buy it from
Yeah.
you all the time.
Well,
That would still, I think, keep some kind of
yes.
level of respect.
Yes. However, you will note that in certain cases, then they'll do that for a while, and then certainly at some point you'll find that the levels of, you know, the purchase orders are going down. He's buying less because you know what? He can find it. He can source the product locally for less, and so you're going to ask him, why are you buying less? You're supposed to have, you know, oh, well, business is not as good, and there's a whole bunch of reasons for that are going to be invoked for that.
They figure it out.
They figure out how to beat the system. And so the challenge, especially in an international market, is to devote the resources to control that market and to make sure that the recipe, the concept, is being complied with to the letter. So yes, in theory, that additional leverage of the obligation to purchase from the franchisor directly, that's not guaranteed success either in terms of yes? Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, and that's really assuming that the consistency of that sauce is going to be the same.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, but even that is not consistent
No.
all the time. It's really hard.
Mm. Mm. That's true.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right. But that's for sauce. Yeah. 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 Right. Mm. I agree. In many cases, it can work. I guess the response was just in other cases, franchisees try to cut cost even more, if that's possible.
Yeah, but if not even that. At Be Our Guest, we owned all of our places. We had Dos Caminos, who's a Mexican restaurant. We had 6 sauces that were made for us in Orlando by a very large company, and the guys on the ground either didn't like the product, they didn't think it was good enough, so they would make their own, or they thought it was too expensive, and they would, I was like, if you want me to make my food cost, I got to do it myself. So, human element, again, it's going back to, the structure. And, the only way we caught it is because our director of purchasing, was like, well, for 100 covers, they're using X amount of sauce, and that other restaurant is using none. What's going on here? So we were able to see it. But again, you can't control anything. And unfortunately, the sauce guys, they make money by selling water. So, when you think you have that recipe, you actually have to freeze it, and then every once in a while you pull it out so you can compare it. Because it's very easy that 1% every time they send it, it's diluted, and then you end up with a product that's not very good.
You have a question?
The whole franchise business is very vulnerable and you have a lot of challenge that you face in the relationship between the franchisor and the franchisee. But I believe the franchisor, sometimes he needs to put himself in the franchisee shoes to understand why he's looking to cheat into certain product, because he care about how to save costs and how to make additional profit out of that. So when the franchisor would find a formula that he can able, let's say, to produce, for example, on a big quantity that give him lower cost from as a source, even after the shipment, he will not go into alternative choices, which he has mentioned. But I've noticed most of the successful franchise brands are American. I don't know, what I've seen in this type of region, maybe Dubai, and we've seen that the expansion plan of the American franchise are faster. Is it the system in place? What is the secret of the best franchise concept to expand it faster? Is it why American are like more aggressive into expansion their brand? Because we've mentioned too many brands that they were American brand, that they were able to expand faster than any other brand coming from different region of the world.
I think you have to go back 25 years ago, where the US, which is pretty much one big platform with huge white space, and these guys are, 25, 30 years later, they're masters at franchising. So when they're coming to different countries, they've already learned so much in their own country. In Europe, it's very difficult. You're dealing with how many languages, you're dealing with how many things. I mean, in the US, the platform was very simple, and the growth of the middle class, has really helped, these franchises getting implemented with commercial real estate. So if you think about, they're just a much more mature business than, most of the countries, just because of the landscape of it. But if you go to Asia, I mean, you're going to see very successful Asian food franchises that we don't know about, that are going to have a very hard time coming into the US or Europe or even the Middle East, but they're very successful in their own right in Asia. So I think that's part of the landscape, the way it's laid out.
And by the way, there are US systems that fail, so they're not perfect. And I guess what I've seen from the US systems that I've worked with that have been successful, as those that you have suggested, are those that have done that due diligence we were talking about at the front end, and that have invested quite a bit of time, energy, human resources into going into a country and making sure that the concept is well executed in that country, and they exercise Americans are very good at, generally, at imposing their demands on how to do things and making them comply with it. They're good, we've all seen it in the world, they're good policemen, and generally, from what I've seen, from the successful ones that I've seen and that I've worked with, is they've been generally, as I said, there are some exceptions, but they've been able to carry out the plan of that international expansion in one market or another. But they have had their challenges. China, a lot of them have had their challenges, just because sometimes it's the economy. We haven't talked about that today.
The market itself, it doesn't help. It depends on the... Sometimes some brands are very successful in other continent. They go to another continent where it will not. It will not work.
Right. And there's a lot of trial and error in this, because you think you're going to be successful in one country, but it turns out that for a whole bunch of reasons, it's not what you thought. But that's the learning curves. And I think, as Alex put it, they've been around. When you think about it, franchising was really, the International Franchise Association was founded by, Bill Rosenberg from Dunkin' Donuts and a couple of other guys who got around in the 50s and decided to pool their resources and to create an industry that is self-regulated at the time, or that was pushing for regulation. I mean, they were the creators of this business model to a certain extent, although it existed before. But since then, they have a long history in the US of, and again, as Alex put it, of having done that trial and error there and having learned there, and then having used that experience when they've gone elsewhere. But they have had a lot of misses. Subway failed miserably in France for a number of years. Exactly. So they're not perfect. And so in as much as there are success stories, there are also significant failures.
And there's still, I was speaking with a gentleman, one of our investors, very close with people in Vietnam, and McDonald's just started in Vietnam. They just awarded the franchise to someone who's related to the prime minister. And, again, they picked the right partner. There's unlimited capital behind it. And, they're only getting into the market now.
Is there an element of, I don't know the franchise model very well, but is there an element of the product being fixed or quite static? Once you've done that, developed it, you know what works, there you go, this is what you do. Or does it keep evolving?
Oh, absolutely. Concepts in both the franchising and non-franchising evolve constantly.
And they ought to, would it be fair to say?
And they have to, of course, because the competitive environment commands it.
Exactly. So would it be fair to say that much like any other relationship or partnership, there is an element of ongoing contribution and adding value and innovation that is required?
Yes, because...
So if you set up a franchise and give somebody a couple of recipes and a few menus, and let them go and do their own thing.
Well, that's not going to fly.
Then obviously in 5 years'
No,
time, they'll come
right,
back and say, what am I
right.
getting?
No,
for
there's brand integrity that's important. But what I'm saying, a lot of, most of you know this, but a lot of products have been introduced by franchisees because they have been proposed as being something that should be added to the concept.
And they've worked.
And it worked. Sometimes they don't work, sometimes they have worked, but that's an ongoing, I mean, it's very fluid, and the relationship is fluid, and the successful ones have good communication. My other, I mentioned 2 mantras, I have a third one, is communication. But, this wasn't a session about franchising, I'm sorry, I spoke maybe too much about it, but communication between the parties is probably the most, once you've chosen your right partner, but that dialogue has to be continuously ongoing, or else it's not going to work.
From my own personal experience, I've said, you talk about franchising and 10 years down the line, 10 franchisees coming up and saying, what do we get? I had this situation with one restaurant, 10 years, lots of chefs come and go, and people learn things, and this is what you said happens in hotels, people come and learn things and go away. What I found was people may come and go and do a dish in the next restaurant or the next place that opens up. That might be exactly what you might have been doing. But then, there's no control over that. What one can do, or I have tried to do, is sort of just go on and do the next thing, because the next thing is something that they haven't come across. So it's constantly evolving, yeah. I suppose. True. Yeah.
We're sort of,
We're almost at the
4:30.
end, yeah.
We're past our bedtime. Certainly me, with jet lag. So I would like to thank you very much for having come this afternoon. Your presence was very appreciated. I hope you take something away from this conversation, and thanks again.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for Stefan and Alex. And thank you all very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And thank you for being at the first GRIF and staying till the bitter end. And we will be in touch, and we hope to see you again next year. But we will be in touch with to get your ideas on how we can kind of improve and move forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you.